I hope you all enjoyed the breakouts. Lots of really interesting questions, which is always a great sign of excellent speakers and a well-curated program. We've had a day packed with insights and intelligence, and now it's time to sum up. And when I was first asked to MC this conference, and I looked at the program, and I thought, I hope I'm not asked to sum up. And then I was told that someone else was doing it, and then I saw who was doing it, and I thought, brilliant. So this person does an absolutely brilliant job of summing up multiple sessions, multiple speakers, and is probably the person you've seen running between the breakout rooms to try and cover everything. So we'll test you, David. It is my great pleasure to welcome Professor David Capie. David is Director of the Centre for Strategic Studies and Professor of International Relations at Victoria University of Wellington. He's also a Regional Co-Chair of the Council for Security Cooperation in the Asia Pacific. Welcome, David.
Ina mana, ina reo, e rarangitera tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. It's lovely to see you. It's lovely to see such a packed room at the end of a very long and busy and rich day. And my huge thanks to Hamish and the Institute for International Affairs for inviting me to offer a few sort of summary thoughts on the discussions in this closing session. And can I just start first and fundamentally by sending a huge mihi to the Institute, to Hamish, to all the sponsors, to the speakers and the presenters for what I think has been really just a superb day of debate, discussion, dialogue, absolutely terrific. But I would agree that it's a little bit of mission impossible to try and do a justice to a day of discussions that's included, by my count, no fewer than 4 keynote presentations, 4 parallel sessions, and which has traversed everything from climate to crypto, from defence to disinformation. And it's required, as you heard me, jumping around and running backwards and forwards quite a bit. So to the speakers, if I was in your panel and I got up and left when you were speaking, it wasn't because I was bored, probably. But I was trying to be in 2 places at once, so my apologies for that. So I'm going to try and be brief, and I'm not going to recover every speech and every panel blow by blow, but really just try and tease out a few key themes that jumped out at me over the course of what's been a really busy day. And I guess I went back and I was just initially thinking about where we were 2 years ago when we had the last annual NZIIA Conference, which was at Te Papa. And one of the things I remember commenting on at the end of the day that year was just the sheer number of challenges that were impacting on New Zealand's interests and New Zealand society simultaneously. And we can think about climate change, intensifying strategic competition, questions were raised about our economic future and growing protectionism and this new buzzword called decoupling. And of course, COVID-19 was very much front and centre. The borders were still closed. So fast forward 2 years, and happily, our borders are now open, but all of those other challenges are still with us. And if that wasn't already enough reason to be gloomy, to that long list that we identified back in 2021, we can now add to that list the most devastating conflict in Europe since 1945, even worse US-China relations than 2 years ago, and a spiralling global cost of living crisis. And so I thought that was a pretty grim lineup until I went to the digitalization of the world panel, where somebody announced that there's 800 of the leading experts on AI have written a letter saying that AI is going to probably lead to our extinction as a species. So that was a cheerful note to wind up on. Now, this is a pretty grim situation, and Adam Tooze, a really terrific political economist, has come up with a word for this world that we live in, which he describes as we're in a stage of polycrisis, a cluster of global risks with compounding effects, such that the overall impact of the way these are interacting is actually much worse than the sum of each of their parts. Now, so I would say I'm looking forward to the next NZIIA conference in 2025, but I'm quite happy with things as they are. I don't feel you've got to lift your game again. So I think we've done a really good job. The speakers and presenters have done a really excellent job on painting a picture of the challenges and threats out there, and I think in a nuanced way talking about some of the consequences for New Zealand. Just picking out some of the ones that really struck with me, the emphasis on the securitization of the trade agenda now, and the need for firms to be vigilant all the way through their supply chains. That we're entering a new world of trade, where we've got some good things to celebrate in terms of FTAs with the UK and the EU, possibly, maybe not too far away with the Gulf Cooperation Council. But after that, it looks pretty slim pickings, that we're entering an era where those traditional FTAs is coming to an end. We're also in an era of more assertive great powers, in particular Russia and China. And actually I was struck by the fact that there seemed to me a lot more emphasis on Russia than China over the course of the day. It was interesting to me on how much emphasis there was, for example, in the Indo-Pacific panel, a really enjoyable discussion, on the war in Ukraine. And in his time, in his keynote presentation, Secretary Crittenbrink told us just how much of his time he spends talking to European leaders about Asia's security and Asian leaders about Europe's security. In Prime Minister Rabuka's keynote, he reminded us that supply chains can be interdicted by conflict even on the other side of the world. We got a clear account of the dangers of political polarization, the normalization of disinformation, the crisis of trust, and something that it was said is only going to get worse in an era of AI and deep fakes. And we were also reminded that what we call things matters. 2 years ago in her speech to this conference, Prime Minister Ardern put the government's sort of full stamp of approval on this label of Indo-Pacific. But I think 2 years on, there's still, my sense was, listening to the presentations, a degree of ambivalence about this idea. The Indo-Pacific label still seems to be contested, particularly in the Pacific. The South Pacific countries feel that this was not a concept they were asked about, and they've put forward this competing narrative we heard about frequently of the Blue Pacific. Earlier this year, Secretary of Foreign Affairs Chris Seed talked to the Foreign Affairs Defence Trade Select Committee, one member of which, Golriz Garaman, was speaking with one of the panels. And he described a world in which we're seeing three shifts take place. A move from rules to power, from economics to security, from efficiency to resilience. And I think our speakers across the panels today did a really good job of reinforcing this pretty dark take on the world, that it's not easy being a small state at the best of time, and these are most definitely not the best of times. But it's easy, I think, to focus on the challenges. Not always good for morale, but it's easy to focus on the challenges. But I really want to commend the Institute for emphasising the need for international solutions as the theme for this year's conference. In his excellent talk to one of this morning's panel, Edward Carr from The Economist, and if you weren't in that session, I really recommend it's worth having a look at the video when it goes up on YouTube, talked about the dangers of catastrophizing, the dangers of being too pessimistic about the world. And so I think it's a useful injunction, and it's good to really think about what's possible as well as what's challenging. And I think it's an enormous credit to the speakers and the organisers that there was no shortage of ideas and suggestions put forward today. From our first keynote speaker, Foreign Minister Mahuta, we were reminded of the importance of Indigenous perspectives and approaches, those cultural weapons that we heard about. We heard about the shift in several panels from the inclusion in trade agreements, the inclusion of just a Treaty of Waitangi exception, now to whole chapters that talk about Indigenous connections. The importance of whakapapa and tikanga in enriching and in strengthening Aotearoa's diplomacy and connections to the Pacific. Some suggestions were more specific. One area where New Zealand could take the lead in Indigenous rights internationally, we were told, was in the area of intellectual property rights and the protection of traditional knowledge. And the fact that that came from a former cabinet minister, I'll leave to you to decide whether or not that gives it some extra oomph. In the panel on trade and commercial ties, there was not just wailing about the way that about all the ills, but a call for a fundamental review of trade policy, going beyond those traditional stakeholders, focusing on possibilities of reducing costs and non-tariff barriers, promoting ideas like mutual recognition. There was a call in the digitalisation panel for New Zealand to embrace opportunities around the digitalisation of finance, the need for New Zealand to create new regulatory frameworks, things like machine-readable legislation. Now, I was at a party once where a man came up to me and told me that he was looking forward to retiring once his fortune was made when his crypto boat came in. And my heart sank for him. And I have to say, I can't say I feel a lot better about crypto having heard this panel, with no disrespect to an excellent speaker from the industry. But it really was a fascinating panel nonetheless. So I could go on about these contributions, these solutions that were put forward. But one thing I took away from the conference was a reminder that however grim the world can seem, we shouldn't surrender and assume that as a small state we are hapless, we are helpless, and we are without agency. And that brings me, I guess, to my third theme, which is in itself another kind of solution, and that is, how will we work with partners in this increasingly challenging world? And here it was really interesting to me that Foreign Minister Mahuta talked about the importance of New Zealand's independent foreign policy. But she was very clear to say, this is not isolation, this is not neutrality, this is not flying solo, but it's working out really what fits with our interests and with our values. And I didn't hear his presentation this afternoon, unfortunately, but I would bet, having spent the last 3 days with him, that Cheng Shui Quick, in his brilliant panel on internationalism and multilateralism, regionalism, talked about how small states don't usually face one big choice, but lots of small choices. And it was... And Foreign Minister Mahuta said, we won't always end up with, making decisions exclusively with those whose views mirror our own. Assistant Secretary Crittenbrink listed a whole list of very nice things where New Zealand and the United States can work together. But I suspect the one issue he's really interested in finding out more about while he is here for the next few days is where New Zealand fits in with that US ambition that he talked about growing greater collective capacity in the Indo-Pacific. We've seen the emergence over the last few months of a sort of debate about New Zealand's possible connection to AUKUS, and the relationship between an independent foreign policy and that question of collective capacity. And that was something I think that came up in the final panel on defence issues, but it's still let's just say it's a live debate, it's an ongoing conversation. And lastly, just on this question of partnering, there was so much emphasis on the importance of the Pacific, and I thought that was terrific. And I thought that Prime Minister Rabuka made a very important point where he told us through an example, he reminded us through an example that partnering is a two-way street, and reminded us of those Fijian soldiers who were down in Hawke's Bay after Cyclone Gabrielle, helping clear up the disaster there. Finally, a last theme to me was the importance of having a national conversation about this more challenging world. And the panel that dealt with that issue touched on the challenges facing the media, not just questions of trust, but increasingly for media organisations, the problems of how to keep the lights on. The point was made not to talk down to the public on these issues. Josie Pagani pointed out that it was New Zealanders that led the government in terms of demanding a more robust response on Ukraine than the other way around. But beyond that, can I offer in closing just a few words in defence of expertise? I think we need a world where we can look at a world and see a world through our own eyes, reflecting on our own interests and values. To do that, we need people who understand our region in all of its diversity and complexity, its politics, its economics, its history, its cultures and languages. And if you'll forgive me a rant, we talk a good game as a country, but right now in New Zealand, we have no historians of China in any of our universities, no historians of India in our universities. In the restructures at Otago and Victoria that are being proposed and going on, Asian studies is prospectively been identified for cuts. At Victoria, every language except Te Reo is possibly slated for cuts and potentially closure. My excellent colleague Jason Young runs the New Zealand Contemporary China Research Centre, a consortium across universities, focused on our biggest trading partner, a third of our exports, and arguably our biggest security challenge. That centre has a staff of 1.7 people. Now you look across the Tasman and you see the conversations that are generated there, and the reason those conversations are richer and deeper and broader is because they are invested in. And I think we are rightly seeing at the moment an investment in New Zealand's defence capacities, and I welcome that. But I would say we are grossly underinvesting in the soft skills we need to navigate this much more dangerous world. If we don't have the people with the languages, with the cultures, with the deep knowledge about our region, then we'll have to defer to the analysis and the perspective of others. And there will be plenty of people out there willing to tell us what we should think, willing to help, but their interests and their values will not always be identical to our own. So that is why I think this conference on New Zealand's place in the world, our interests, our values, is so valuable. That's why I think it's been so great to see such a broad audience here over the course of the day, and a special shout out to the students who contributed so well to all of the sessions I was at. That's why it's great to have this conference in Tamaki Makaurau and not just to have it in Wellington every 2 years. And that's why these conversations need to carry on, not just in Auckland, not just in Wellington, but in Nelson, in Napier, in Petone, in Pororua and Pataruru, across the country, engaging all New Zealanders. My congratulations to the Institute and to Hamish and all the people who've made this such a successful conference. Here's hoping for a happier world when the NZIIA meets again in 2025. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, David, for that excellent summary. I am always impressed by your ability to distill so much information from multiple sessions into such a succinct address, but also for reminding us that we do have agency, but we need to invest in more than just defence to be able to exercise that agency appropriately. It takes many, many people to pull off an event such as this, and now I'd like to invite to the stage the person who has been leading the team that made this possible, Hamish McDougall, Executive Director, New Zealand Institute of International Affairs.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I was thinking as I was listening to David then that this is not a particularly easy speech to give. Not only do I have to follow David with his excellent summation, it really was tremendous, but there's been 40 speakers here today that are all very tough acts to follow, but I will keep it brief, and if you'll excuse a little bit of sort of Academy Awards style speaking for the first part, I just have a number of important thank yous to make. Firstly, importantly, thanking Ngāti Whātua Orake for their mihi whakatau this morning, which was tremendous. It was emotional and evocative, and I think set exactly the right tone for the day. I'd like to thank the board of the New Zealand Institute of International Affairs, all of whom have come up to this event under their own steam and have been tremendously supportive throughout for the last sort of 12 months or so since we've been discussing this, and that includes our chair, Dick Grant, our vice chair, James Kemba, the previous chair, and our new patron, the Right Honourable Surinand Sachinand, the MFAT appointees to the board, Raylene Lou Falani and David Evans, and the other board members as well. So thank you very much for all your support. I'd also like to thank ICON Event Management. I don't know if Marlene and Jamie are in the room, but you took a slightly scrappy pass from the base of the scrum from me about 6 months ago, and you've delivered what I think is a flowing backline move. So heartfelt thanks for me, because you've been a tremendous amount of support. And if you're going away from today thinking that it's been a professional, well-run, well-managed event, then I think it's largely down to them. So thank you. We wouldn't be here without our sponsors. I'd like to think there's a lot of value in conferences such as this, but there's also a lot of investment that has to be made, and I particularly like to thank our gold sponsor, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, who have been helpful in myriad ways. Our silver sponsor, the Centres of Asia Pacific Excellence, and in particular their inviting of 45 university students from around the country today who have made a really substantial, informed and fantastic contribution to the conference. So thank you to the Capes and to the students that they've enabled to come along today. Also, additional thanks to the Asian New Zealand Foundation, Konrad Adenauer Foundation, and the EU delegation, who have all sponsored in various ways. Thank you very much. Obviously, I need to thank all the speakers today. There would be no show without you, and I think to a person, you've been fantastic. And I'd like to include all our keynotes. I'd like to include Zaina, our wonderful MC, David for your summation, and all the panel speakers. Thank you so much for your time today and your wisdom and expertise. The conference kind of speaks to three broader strategies that we're pursuing at the Institute. And the first relates, I think, to where we are today in Tamaki Makaurau. David talked about it earlier, but it's our biggest city, it's our most international city, and the Institute sees it as very strategically important, and there's no better way to show that or demonstrate it than putting on events such as this in the middle of the city here. So if there are Aucklanders, we think we've attracted a different kind of audience than we would have attracted in Wellington, and we hope that people from the region here will engage with the Institute and seek to learn more about international affairs. And I'd like to acknowledge a number of our Auckland Branch Committee members who are here today and who have helped to deliver the conference. The second kind of strategic element, again, David put this far more eloquently than I could, but this idea about expertise, about bringing people who have, through professional, personal experience, attain certain knowledge. It's really important to give them a platform, I think, because the issues, the problems are acute, and quite often problems are, addressed behind closed doors, and norms, policies, ideas are created there, and then they kind of move straight through to a sort of slightly shrill partisan political debate. But I think organisations such as ours, we're certainly not the only one, can have a really important role to play to bring experts together to address some of these problems. And I'd like to acknowledge the speakers for taking on board the kind of solutions-focused approach. That kind of speaks to kind of our final ambition, I guess, for the conference, to bring people together. We've had people here from government, from business, NGOs, academia, students, news media. All of these people contribute to our civil society, and I think we're not the only organisation at the Institute that can bring such a group together, but I think we're well placed to do it because we're independent, we're non-partisan, we're not necessarily advocating for policy positions. So we're a kind of neutral place where we like to think a really robust and valuable and rich conversation can take place. So in summary, there's three kind of key aspects that we wanted to deliver today. We wanted a flagship event in Auckland. We wanted to bring expertise to bear, and we wanted to bring people together. So I think obviously it's much more than a day's work, but I think it's been a good day's work, and I'd like to thank you all very much for coming. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hamish. It's not an easy feat bringing so many different groups of people together into the one venue, and to have so many still with us at the end of the day. So can we put our hands together for Hamish and the ICON team once again? Thank you. I hope you have all enjoyed the day as much as I have. A short survey will be available after the conference, and we would greatly appreciate your feedback. This conference, as Hamish said, is a flagship for the Institute, and it keeps getting better thanks to the insights of participants like yourself who help us to improve it each time. Don't also forget your social media posts. We'd love for you to share what you have learned today and continue those conversations online. As David reminded us, we need to have these conversations as a country. Do tag the Institute in your posts, and while you are at it, go beyond tagging the post, tagging the Institute, look up the website. Take a moment to find out about your local chapter of the New Zealand Institute of International Affairs, because there are chapters throughout the country, and we have a number of chapter chairs and representatives here today. For a small island nation, some would say at the bottom of the world, I like to say at the edge of the world, it is imperative that we are connected globally and that we are part of these conversations and having our voice. And the Institute plays a really, really important role in that regard. So the more of us that can be part of those conversations, the better for New Zealand. We started the day noting that our world is changing. The shifting, less stable, and more challenging global environment has significant implications for us. But inherent in our conference theme was also the view that New Zealand can play an important role in international solutions. Our speakers and discussions have highlighted the importance of us responding in a way which aligns with the values and interests we believe safeguard our sense of peace, stability, and inclusive economic prosperity, whilst at the same time contributing to maintaining a peaceful, stable, and prosperous global village. Before I conclude our formal proceedings, I want to leave you with the whakatauki that I think sums up a lot of what our speakers have said today. Mā te rongo ka mōhio, mā te mōhio ka marama, mā te marama ka mātau, mā te mātau ka ora. Through information comes awareness. Through awareness comes understanding. Through understanding comes knowledge. Through knowledge comes life and well-being.